I'm Karen O'Brien, I'm the Vice-Chancellor. It's a great pleasure to have Convocation here at Durham for the first time in a very long time, and to have it in a building that wasn't even in existence the last time we had Convocation here in this amazing hub building that's sprung up on Mount Oswald. So I'm going to chair a session which is going to give you a flavour of some of our research. We do so much in the way of stellar, interdisciplinary and exciting research, but this is a particular topic that I hope you'll find very interesting. And I'm just going to introduce my colleagues and then say a little bit about what the theme of the session is going to be. So next to me, Professor Amanda Ellison is a professor in the Department of Psychology, and she was until very recently director of the Wolfson Research Institute for Health and Wellbeing. After that, Patrick Jaguar, who is assistant professor in our newest Department of Sport and Exercise Sciences. Then Dr. Marion Hardy, who is professor of business and computing in the Durham University Business School, and Angela Woods, who's professor of medical humanities and director of Durham's Institute for Medical Humanities. And together they're going to speak for about 5 minutes each, and then say a little bit about their research and how it connects, and then we'll open the floor for some questions. And I hope it will give you the flavour of the rich and connected research agenda we have around health and wellbeing. We don't, as you know, have a medical school, but that doesn't mean to say that we're not seriously and deeply concerned with issues of health and wellbeing, very connected to our local, our national and international networks around this very important area. And we are, as a university, I think, very deeply concerned with the social and psychological experience of health, of pain, of disability, and the ranges of mental health experiences that people have. We situate that within our changing planet and physical environments, and our work underpins technical and other practical interventions, builds communities of practice, and promotes inclusion and equity in the health arena. We have long-standing institutes that I've just mentioned in this area, the Wolfson Institute and Medical Humanities. We have a psychology department that's been with us for a long time, that has grown amazingly and rapidly in recent years. And we have a relatively new Department of Sport and Exercise Sciences. And combining that with all of the activity we have in our student body and other departments in the university, I think you'll hear that we're really doing exciting, influential and important work in the area of health and wellbeing, and that we're really collaborating across disciplines in ways that will have practical outcomes for our community and for the world in more general. So I will start with Amanda and ask you to say something about your research, and then we'll move through each of our colleagues in turn. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. My name is Amanda. As you know, I am a neuroscientist, and what I like to do is send magnetic pulses into your brain. So if anybody needs some neurostimulation, just come along to my lab just down the hill. Any takers? So what I'm really interested in doing with that technique is to work out what different parts of the brain do. And once I've worked that out, then what I really want to do is work out how they talk to each other, how different areas of the brain talk to each other. And that's really, really important, because if we want to understand that from purely a curiosity of how it is that we tick, but also how it is we might mitigate brain injury and disease, we've got to understand how it works in the first place. So this has led me into an arena whereby I've been involved in developing treatments to regain vision after loss, but also understanding pain, headache, hallucinations, concussion, air pollution and its effect on brain health, addiction, how we perceive the world around us, how we navigate the world around us. Now, I do accept this makes me sound rather academically promiscuous, and I am. But actually, the brain does underlie everything that we do. It was Francis Crick who said that it was the astonishing hypothesis that all that we do, everything that we dream, everything that we think, everything that we want, everything that we desire, every ambition that we have, all of our hopes, all of our fears come from this little bit of real estate that is encased within our skulls. And not to denigrate his words, but actually to somebody like me, it's not astonishing. And it is actually rather reductive, okay? Now, I have now walked a path whereby I am what I would call, nobody else does, a recovering reductionist, where I look outside of the brain and look at the influences of our brain and our behaviour and our environment in which we find ourselves on our health and well-being. As a physiologist by training, this is what led me onto this path. It's a very intimate and perpetual dance that each of those factors have an influence on our health and well-being, and that's pretty much where we will find therapeutic windows beyond the biomedical. That is the very traditional way in which we interact with health, and it is whole human relevant. So if I give you some examples for fun, if we think about headache, well, this is something that if I were to say to you, well, what we know as a neuroscientist is that in people who experience migraine headaches, the visual part of your brain is a heck of a lot more active than other people's visual parts of the brain. It makes you a lot more sensitive to things like stripes and checks and lines and things like that. Now, far be it from me to comment upon your sartorial choices this evening, but if you look around, don't if you're a migraine. Okay? That's all I'll say about that. And there are other examples of this. We know with our patients who are experiencing visual loss following brain injury, something that is not addressed very well by health systems, in particular the NHS. We know that goal setting and indeed their perceived perceptions of societal expectations around their injury and their abilities, that can affect their ability to rehabilitate their function. We know that there are two systems in your brain for pain. And how do we work with that? Well, you've got one sensory component, but you also have an affective component. How is it that you actually experience that pain? And you can actually play with that aspect of it, which changes your biochemistry, your neurochemistry in your brain. And that means that actually there are these novel therapeutic windows. That means that we don't have to resort to addictive drugs that are actually ultimately harmful. So as Karen mentioned, I was the director of the Wolfson Research Institute for Health and Wellbeing until very recently. And this interdisciplinary philosophy was embedded in everything that we did there. We pioneered that kind of philosophy. About 5 years ago, I've recently ended my tenure. It's basic inquiry through impact on people and society and woven together with pathways for implementation, meaning that we have purpose-built solutions for societal challenges. Now, we have interlinked challenges, so they're across the strata of society, demographics, socioeconomic, culture, race, place, and the environment. And again, that speaks to how it is that our brain, our body, and our behaviour is all wrapped up in our environment in this very interlinked way. We do use data and we use AI as a very prevalent tool, a very new tool, to inform predictive models of health. This is something that we do with air pollution and brain health through our Inspire project, but also through predicting whose brain aneurysm may rupture over the course of their lifetime, which is sorely needed in our region and has a paucity of research around it. We use co-production in a sensible way in that we can bring people who are affected by these societal challenges together to build predictive models as to what will work for whom and why. And that means that we can create more effective, more economical, more targeted healthcare for people with serious needs that are not restricted to biomedical approaches. So it's complex, right? It is very, very complex. But we must not be blinded by that complexity. We need to identify the influences across scale, we need to understand their valence, and we also need to quantify their value. And we can do this, we will prevail. We do have the capacity across our faculties to do this. This takes us from an arena that we are all familiar with, where medicine helps some of the people some of the time, to this whole human approach that allows us to help all of the people all of the time. So thank you. Thank you for time.
Thanks, Amanda. Really fascinating to hear more about brain-based work. To continue on that brain wave, my work works with neurodivergent people. By just show of hands, has anyone heard of autism and or know someone who's neurodivergent? That's a huge difference from about 30 years ago, where autism was rarely discussed and stereotypically portrayed in movies like Rain Man, with various savant-like skills, which people have actually said was really detrimental to actually raising awareness. But autism, neurodivergence more broadly, is being talked about as a brain-based difference, right? My work tries to understand how can we support the health and well-being of neurodivergent people across the lifespan. So you may be asking, well, why does this matter? Well, autistic people, generally speaking, have higher rates of physical health challenges, mental health challenges, right? Higher rates than the general population specifically. not only do they have health challenges, getting access, we just heard about the NHS and some of the challenges of accessing systemic issues. Autistic and neurodivergent people have higher challenges accessing tailored and support and services that actually reflect what their needs are, because the research hasn't kept up with just the amount of support that has been needed. And the last piece why this matters is a lot of the epidemiological research is showing that these inequalities that we're seeing in society in terms of accessing care, in terms of these health needs not being addressed, are contributing to premature mortality. So I don't want to paint a bad picture, but the research isn't on our side. It shows that autistic people generally are passing away 15 to 30 years earlier than people in the general population. So I think by looking at the faces in the room, you can agree with me that we can't keep doing the same. It's not working, right? We've got to do something different. And what we're trying to do at Durham is to be different, right? We're trying to think differently, trying to ask new, bold, innovative, what I would argue potentially gutsy questions that might get me in trouble with my line manager in the back. One of those questions is, well, what is the relationship between physical and mental health? For a long time, we've seen these two entities as separate strata that didn't connect. But in some early research I've been involved in, we've seen that heart health can actually predict brain health. So if we support heart health, can we by then improve brain health and minimize potentially the impacts of depression, which are really high in autistic and neurodivergent people? In addition to that, being in a sport department, I am always asked with the question of, well, what can we do to support their physical, mental health, and just overall well-being to live a healthy, active life through physical activity? Can it be a tool? Can it be something that we promote generally? But then also to problematize and ask deep questions about, well, what is the limitations of this approach? Can it harm people? Some of the work that I've done has shown that bullying and exclusion in physical activity spaces is the #1 reason why people don't come back. And it's really high for autistic and neurodivergent people. Sensory experiences are really difficult in those spaces, but equally the bullying and the exclusion, where they're not feeling welcomed and supported in those spaces, is another reason why they don't keep coming back. So if we want to include them, if we want to support their health and well-being, what do we do to try and promote this sort of new way of thinking? Rather than just saying, go to the gym and be more active, do more, you're not doing enough. How do we find ways that are inclusive and reflective of the diverse needs, interests, and abilities? And I think for me, being here at Durham for the last 2 years has really opened my eyes to the wealth of the different institutes. So we have, for example, the Center for Neurodiversity and Development, which I'm a part of, which is working particularly with neurodivergent young people, but also collaborating across different disciplines like the Wolfson, but then also IMH, which Angela will speak to you in a minute. And I think that sort of way of thinking is the future. We can't keep assuming health in these isolated box-based thinking, which has really governed how the NHS functions, how we see health, because we know that we're human beings and we're complex and we don't fit in boxes. And that's part of the thinking we're trying to push. So how are we going to do that? It's the $1 million question. Well, now that we're back in the UK, £1 million question. We're about to launch a multi-year project across Canada, the UK with University College London, Belgium, and Ireland to really look at how can we optimally support the well-being, health needs of neurodivergent people. You might be asking, well, you said autism and you're confusing neurodivergence, but I'm not. I'm using both as an example because oftentimes we focused on one specifically, like autism, but we haven't connected the dots to say, well, how does autism and ADHD connect, right? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And there's so many other neurodivergent conditions which we're increasingly saying, again, and we're seeing that they're connecting. A group I'm a part of in Toronto has found biologically our brains are the exact same when you look at neurodivergence, that whether it's autism or ADHD or OCD or dyspraxia, biologically, everything looks the same. But our psychology, the way that we diagnose these conditions, actually don't match our biology. We need to sort of update the way that we're thinking about these things. And through this collaboration, we're trying to problematize these questions and ask, well, how can we move forward? How can we then develop this into meaningful differences in people's lives? One way to do that is through think about structural issues, right? I've talked about inequities and inequalities in terms of accessing care. If we don't change those structural problems in society that are limiting participation and inclusion in healthcare, then that won't translate to kind of the healthcare access need, right? And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to push that envelope by first and foremost working with neurodivergent people. So we have a Durham-based charity here called Daisy Chain, just over in Stockton, who has been really close and uses animal therapy as a way in physical activity to try and promote well-being. And so we're trying to look at, well, what does that actually do? What can it do? Can it provide meaning? Can it provide excitement? Moving away from just this very reductionist biomedical approach to health. In addition to other charity partners co-producing another important word that we keep talking about, to really listen and work together with the neurodivergent community to identify what their needs are and to move forward. And that's kind of the frontier that we're trying to push, that rather than coming in from me and rather than working on neurodivergent people, we're working with. And I think to change that narrative in science, which still, at least in the autism world and the neurodivergent world, hasn't made that shift. If there's one thing I've learned, thinking about the changing world, I led a study in Canada about the impacts of the pandemic, and it really had a disproportionate impact on neurodivergent people with significant decreases in physical health and mental health. And to be honest, from what we're seeing in the longitudinal data in year 3, they're not bouncing back, our participants. So we've got to start to think about, not that I'm hoping for another pandemic, but if there's a global crisis, if there's a local crisis, how do we respond? Because when I was advising to the Canadian government, the people who were disabled weren't even included ever in that conversation, whether it was vaccine uptake or whether it was physical activity for health promotion, they were left off the table. But we can't keep doing more of the same when it's not working. So if you think and ask me what I'm trying to do to think about the changing planet, trying to think about with the next global crisis, how can we support people best? Because we really didn't do that very well during the pandemic. I just want to close with, if there's one thing I've learned doing this work for the last several years, it's that I can't do this alone, and it's taken literally a village of people, from 600 plus participants who I've worked with over about 10 years of time, through to families and caregivers who have really just shaped my thinking. And that includes all of you gathered today, here, right? You're part of the alumni engagement community, you've made a choice to be here, but you're also agents of change. So whether you contribute philanthropically to the university to support research, whether you can stimulate a conversation about raising kind of awareness about neurodiversity and neurodivergence more broadly, what their health needs are, I can't do this alone, and I need your help. So my hope is that one day we can start to focus on what neurodivergent people can do rather than what they can't do, which is what we've always done. And for being agents of change and for showing up today, I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for having me today. So I'm Marianne Hardy. I'm based at the business school, but I'm a sociologist, and my research looks at sort of broad areas of health access and health interactions, how those conversations start and where they take place. And you'd be unsurprised to learn that this is sort of based anecdotally on personal experience. So when I was growing up, I got really into counting my steps. My dad gave me a pedometer, and I was into obsessively thinking about how far is it from my council house to the local bakery and the local shop for a beano every week. How many steps is it to get to school? And I didn't realize at the time, but what I was doing is I was collecting health data. I was health data tracking, and that seems to have become an incessant and almost normalized part of our lives in terms of the devices that we have, the shiny little phones, but also the tech that we wear. And some of that is really sophisticated, sort of around our patterns of sleep, but also to patterns of what we eat, when we eat, the amount of exercise that we do. But this is painting a very kind of individualized picture of health that at the beginning of kind of my research sort of 2 decades ago was interesting in terms of points of access, what that data can give us, how that shapes our experiences and our interactions with healthcare professionals, like GPs, when we take that data in with us to explain our health conditions. So I'm diagnosed with endometriosis. I've used that data in the past as evidence of kind of my experiences of when there's pain and what I can do and all those kinds of things. And this seems very empowering at the point of access of the conditions of those data, but also having access to that technology as well and being able to afford it and the privilege to be able to interpret that data. And then in 2012, the sort of position and scope of my research really changed. I started to look at household interactions and how that pivoted health conversations and what that did for people with caring roles, for example. And that happened in pretty dramatic circumstances. So what happened in 2012 is my father died very suddenly. One minute he was a healthy 60-year-old, he was sort of walking and running around, he was pretty fit, he was an academic as well. And then 3 days later, we found out that he was riddled with cancer and he died of sepsis. And the ironic thing is that he was also a health academic, he taught at medical schools. And his area of research was basically, why do men not go to the GP? And he didn't go to the GP. And what happened was the worst of things that could happen. But it really made me think about not only access to points of health data and how sort of compelling and exciting that can be, because there's always like a sort of pickup of excitement and fruition of interest in that data when you first start health tracking. So you've got a Fitbit or a Withings or whatever bit of technology it is, or your smartphone is tracking your steps. You're like, ooh, I hit my 10,000 target, or I'm doing 60,000 today. I know, awesome. And then there's kind of like a hit of fatigue where that starts to kind of like get less interesting for you because it's annoying and it's daily health practice. And it's like, And what I've discovered in my research is that really pivots into very interesting conversations that are initiated around health, and particularly during the pandemic. So it didn't have to be the case that everyone was health tracking within those households. It could be that just one person was doing it. What I was really interested in finding was how those conversations took place, when and with who, so that no one else would ever have to go through what I went through, where someone was hiding their pain, their health conditions, they weren't talking about it. And certainly where those avenues of research have sort of opened up at Durham is a broad scope of interdisciplinary research around, sports health, brain health, compassion, empathy, new forms of interaction, caring roles, dealing with chronic pain, neurodivergence, all those different areas of research that kind of coalesce within households, which are a fantastic melting pot in terms of the people that we live with and the dynamics that we share there, and where those kind of conversations are going to take us, in the future in terms of different levels of health professionalism, but also because I'm based in the business school, the different opportunities at the commercial level there for health data tracking as well, and sort of what our individual rights are around that, what that tells us in terms of sort of health patterns, in terms of health populations in the future, and where we can carry that into future communities to, as Amanda and Patrick have laid out, to prevent moments of health crisis in the future, whether it's a future pandemic or something like that. And sort of the university is so supportive and enriching of those kinds of interdisciplinary links. And though it's been a very personal journey for me, I hope that really continues in terms of the scope of the researchers that we have here, but also the students and the teaching and learning that we're starting to bring in around health conversations too.
And Angela.
Thank you. It's such a joy to come to events like this and to hear your colleagues present such interesting aspects of their own research and be reminded of just what an extraordinary environment and what a privilege it is to work in this environment at Durham. So my name is Angela, I'm the Director of the Institute for Medical Humanities, and I don't think it's self-evident that a university panel assembled to talk about health would necessarily feature someone with a disciplinary background in English literature, nor is it self-evident that the humanities have a seat at the table. But Durham is, I think, nationally and arguably internationally one of the leading institutions for bringing the transformative power of the humanities into health and health research. And it's incredible to see just the sheer disciplinary variety that my colleagues at the Institute and across the university have, and the ways in which they're able to open up different health challenges, I suppose, and different health contexts. So my own work, I want to tell you about a project that really, really excited me and an undertaking that is just beginning. So this project was called Hearing the Voice. It was led by Charles Fernyhough in psychology and was a large interdisciplinary project funded over 10 years by the Wellcome Trust. When I say interdisciplinary, I mean radically interdisciplinary. So Amanda and I were on that original project. We had colleagues from theology and religion, from psychiatry, from linguistics, history, from art history, sociology, anthropology. We were working with clinicians in the NHS across early intervention in psychosis services. We were working with leaders in the mental health charity sector. We were working with artists and writers, and crucially, with people who hear voices. And the fundamental starting point of that project was not with the symptom, it was not with an auditory verbal hallucination, it was not with the diagnosis that was a biomedical artifact first and foremost and arising from within systems of biomedical knowledge. It was with experience. It was with the ordinary, average, everyday experience of people who are hearing voices that no one else can hear, and who may be inspired by those voices, who may be terrorised by those voices, who may need clinical care, who may be very, very far away from feeling as though that's a problem in their lives. So this project ran for 10 years, and I would bore the socks off you if I talked about all the different studies and outputs and findings, but two things I was really proud to have been involved in were a major exhibition that brought together different perspectives and experience on hearing voices over the last 2,000 years, bringing artefacts and manuscripts from the British Library into conversations with artworks from young people living in Durham. And what research can do when it opens up into the material world and into using the arts in particular to engage new audiences was for me a kind of revelation as someone who'd never done that kind of work before. The second thing that I feel quite ferociously proud of was a study that we did in 2015, where we set to one side the standardised scales and measures that are routinely used in clinical practice that tell us about the things that clinicians think are important and that research scientists think are important. And we asked voice hearers in their own words, what is it like to hear voices? It's an incredibly deceptively simple question, but in analysing the responses that we got in that study, we were able to show that actually, instead of just hearing sounds or hearing bits of speech or hearing things that weren't necessarily coalesced, 60% of people in that study heard characterful voices. And that insight into characterful voices raised then a huge number of questions about the potential connections between voice hearing in religious contexts and spiritual devotion, voice hearing in clinical contexts, voice hearing as it might be treated in novel psychotherapeutic settings, voice hearing as it might be made into a relational experience. It led to all sorts of different research studies, but the crucial point was that we were able to bring these insights from the arts and humanities into novel research design that actually produced findings that went back to have an impact on people's lives and on all sorts of different research directions. And it's that spirit, that impulse, that collaborative working that puts experience first that is at the centre of a new initiative that we've announced this year through the Institute for Medical Humanities. And that's the Discovery Research Platform for Medical Humanities, which has been awarded £9.5 million from the Wellcome Trust, making us the largest grant-holding humanities-led team in the country. We've got this investment over the next 7 years to see what we can do methodologically to bring the insights of the humanities, arts and social sciences into health research with connected communities here nationally and internationally. It puts Durham on the map in a completely new way and holds out some tremendously exciting opportunities for us working locally, as well as I've said, working with partners all across the piece. And it's something I am so thrilled to talk about. I will knock the socks off anybody who wants to talk in the drinks afterwards.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to our four panellists for giving you, I think, a very rich flavour of the work that we do at Durham, but also a sense of tips of icebergs, because we have so many colleagues in so many departments, and you're referencing them in departments like anthropology, clearly in biosciences, sociology, we could go on and on. And I hope what you've got is a clear sense of how productively and collaboratively people work together in this university, and how important that is to the range of insights in terms of what we do that is informed by the biomedical but goes beyond the biomedical. I think that's fair to say, and it's very grounded in experience and in repositioning experience the patient, the individual at the centre of research. So very, very good to hear what very different research areas, and yet I think a very clear set of common threads across the 4 presentations. So we do have some time for questions. I hope we will have questions, because I think these issues, these areas touch all of us in our lives in different ways, and please don't feel in any way inhibited from asking whatever you think you'd like to hear. So let me just open the floor and see who will take the first question. I'm going to turn to Charlotte, actually, because I must acknowledge our Executive Dean for Social Sciences and Health, who has played a hugely important role. She's herself a health researcher in bringing together and turbocharging this whole agenda area at Durham. So quite right, Charlotte, you get the first question.
Thank you very much, Karen. And a massive thank you to the 4 of our panellists here, because I think what you've spoken to the heart of what we're trying to do in the university, and to develop our health strategy as beyond the clinic. And all 4 of you have really illustrated that and spoken to that in an incredibly exciting and world-leading way of taking things forward. The question I have, I want to bring things to where we are actually. So you're all doing world-leading research, as are others, as Karen has mentioned, in the university in the health field. But we are a university in a region of very significant health inequalities. And we do a lot of work in our region. I know all of you work in our region, as well as working with international partners and on research that is developing global new knowledge. But I'd love to hear you, maybe just some suggestions as to what do we need to do in our region. What's some of the examples of what we're doing in our patch, so to speak, to tackle some of those very deep-seated health inequalities that connect to economic inequalities, social inequalities, that actually some of the questions of the kind that you're asking are able to address more than the kind of within a clinic can address. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we start with you?
By all means, I can point to 2 issues that I'm involved in, but again, it takes a village, huge teams around this. Our region has 9 times the amount of opioid prescriptions than anywhere else in the country, and that's a lot. So it means that we had to, first of all, identify that, and then we had to take steps to understand that. Is it because we have a real diversity of geography in this region, in that you have some really dense urban areas, and you have really sparse rural areas, and maybe it's just easier to get a repeat prescription from your GP than see them and be re-evaluated every time you see them. No, it wasn't that. It is actually that people feel more pain in the Northeast. They are actually experiencing more pain. And of course, the biomedical approach, which is very important. We would never discount the biomedical approach. I'm a physiologist, I'd never say that. But what we do need to say is that we've got to understand where this pain is coming from, and that it is being experienced by more people in the Northeast, and ergo, there are more opioid prescriptions. Now, opioids are very powerful painkillers that numb your mind to pain and eventually have very bad side effects. And you need more and more, and the underlying addiction for this kind of thing. And we've approached it in various different ways, and you can nab me afterwards and ask me about those because they're fascinating. But the one thing that we had to do was address this problem of an over-prescribing. And was this a GP practice, or was this a patient experiential issue? And it turns out that actually our GPs, great and all, and overworked as they are, when they are going through their training, they spend about 5 minutes on pain in their medical degree. 5 minutes, right? And the reason why is because there's a cure for that. There's a tablet that you can take and it takes the pain away. So there's very little understanding about the biopsychosocial models of pain. So part of it was to create an educational offer for our GPs and for our medical professionals across the region. The person I'm talking about here is Professor Paul Chazot, who heads up our Pain Academy from the Wolfson Research Institute. And then the next thing to do is to engage the people who were in chronic pain for many, many years, this intractable problem, and to look at it from another angle. And so what he's looked at it from has been very much from the arts side of things. So he's instigated dance and artistic endeavours in order to, again, it's like I was saying before, to leverage those neurochemicals that actually are our natural painkillers. So to help people understand their pain, but also to use their bodies in ways in which they can, within the bounds of their pain, and bump up those good neurotransmitters that actually work as painkillers. I don't want to hog the conversation, but if you want to know what the other thing was, nab me the drinks.
Thank you. Other panel members, do you want to comment?
Well, we, in a very similar spirit, I think, have sought out a GP practice in Walker, a so-called deep end GP practices. Deep end GP practices are serve the communities with the highest levels of blanket deprivation. And we're doing something quite radical through the platform that is just not done in these kind of practices, which is sufficiently resource a research presence there for 5 years to build a real continuity of trust that is almost entirely open-ended in terms of where it might go. So one of the barriers that gets in place with researchers engaging communities is this perception that it's short-lived, that it's extractive, that it's a sense of we swarm in as academics and we do a study and we leave and we don't have that depth and continuity of understanding. And what we're doing in this deep end site within the platform is creating a space that is designed to enable the practitioners and the patients in that platform who otherwise have absolutely no capacity to engage in research at all, to help us shape a research agenda. So to actually come up with the questions, come up with the study design, to do that over a long, slow burn period, so that those research studies that will be created in that environment will speak directly to their needs. And I think that we've all talked about co-production and all talked about the value of these engaged ways of working that are very much about challenging kind of received hierarchies of knowledge and evidence and expertise, and recognising that, as you said, Patrick, more of the same is not going to work. We know there are health inequalities. We know that there are all sorts of social determinants of health, but we're not able to shift some of these big structural issues because arguably one major barrier holding that back is we're not doing it in partnership. So hopefully we can hold out these novel methodologies and ways of working that build on some of the expertise within the institution around participatory and co-produced methods to really deepen those connections.
Thank you. Shall we take another question from the floor, but we may well come back to this question right at the back there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Kathy Bader, PhD 2022, and you gave me my diploma. So pleased to see you. I've been in academia now for maybe 4 eons, and came to Durham 8 years ago to start my PhD work. And while the school in the United States I was working for, a research farm, major school, considered themselves interdisciplinary, first thing I noticed when I arrived here was that Durham really did walk the walk in terms of interdisciplinarity across the board. Historians were really sitting down with physicists all the time. And so I'm wondering, this is my question. My question is, what is it that supports that administratively and in terms of your organization? Is there a secret sauce that other schools can mimic? Or is it just happening because it's cold and rainy? Or what do you feel is the driver behind it?
Excellent. Well, why don't I ask Patrick or Marion to...
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think you can tell that I can't hide my English accent. And I came from Canada, and I think there's a huge difference in divides disciplinarity-wise, right? So I think the thing that separates us is that it's actually part of the ethos of the university and part of the culture. And it's not one of those things that you kind of add on at the end. It's literally embedded throughout the work that you're doing, whether it's in your department. So in the sport department, we've got physiologists, we've got sport historians, we have sociologists, we've got psychologists, and that entire kind of lens right away kind of moves away from that sort of isolation thinking. To give you a practical example, in that study I just mentioned we're about to launch, we're working with people from philosophy, we're working with English to try and redefine kind of what does a good life mean for neurodiverse people, right? It's always been defined by clinicians, it's been defined by kind of researchers, but is that what neurodiverse people want? And if it's not what they want, we got to reimagine what that is, right? You can't just leave them with a problem. But the point is that's happening across the university, and I do say that it's part of the ethos and one of the exciting things that I thought about when I chose to come here. So definitely part of the culture.
And Marion, as a sociologist in the business school, you must have a perspective on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised I was surprised that the business school wanted me as a sociologist, to be honest. I thought they wouldn't let me in. But they did. And I was really pleasantly surprised, actually, when I first came here, the genuine offering of interdisciplinarity that cuts through the culture. And you're right, Patrick, the absolute ethos here. Many opportunities to do that through different research groups and sort of just genuine joy and inquisitiveness from other colleagues in other departments and faculties to understand the research problem together, to physically come around that table together, facilitated through things like the Institute for Advanced Studies at the IAS, but also different research groups around the university. So one of the newer ones is the Digital Humanities Group. And again, that's facilitated by researchers who have sort of an overspilling of enthusiasm and pop about sort of questions and ideas, but want to bring together people from, computer science, from sociology, from music, from philosophy, from modern languages, from the business school, dare I say. And those opportunities, don't happen once every semester or so. They happen with a degree of sort of regularity and spontaneity just across the whole breadth and depth of the university, in a way that you can't, I don't know what the magic sauce would be, but you can't really sort of package that up and sell that to someone else. It just it seems to be the Durham way, really, and it's a delight.
Thank you very much. I wish it were a sauce we could package and sell. We need all the income streams we get. Thank you. Let's take another question. There's a question here at the front, towards the front.
Thank you very much. I'm Paul Weatham. I'm a retired Methodist minister in theology here more than 30 years ago. Before that, actually, I was a biological scientist. And I spent, until I retired, I was superintendent of Birmingham, Western Mulberry, Birmingham Black Country. And my question really is cultural groups as well. Having, obviously there is Christian faith, and within that there is a Methodist culture. I have folk from all over the world in my Birmingham circuit, Black Country circuit, all sorts of backgrounds. And I'm wondering how culture, different cultural groups, and there are all sorts of nuances on that. And we had all sorts of interesting interactions between different groups within with different histories. Because Methodism was a worldwide church. In fact, all my colleagues were from Methodist churches. They were seized bar one. There was some British West Indian community while I was there. So, are you looking at cultural groups within this? Because certainly where we were, that actually had an influence.
Who would like to?
Shall I jump
Go ahead,
in there?
yes.
Okay, so one of the challenge academies at the Ulster Research Institute is around race, culture and inequality. And if any of you are interested, you can have a look on our website and see it's actually a matrix. So we have parallel planks and we have, sorry, they're all parallel, what am I talking about? We have horizontal planks and we have vertical planks. And scientist. But the point about this is that you cannot actually interact nowadays sensibly with any kind of health challenge without including issues relating to culture and race, okay? Because it's also nuanced. If I give you an example from the T-side aneurysm group, when a neurosurgeon first came to us and said, the only thing that we have to guide us in whether or not we interact with this ticking time bomb, which is an aneurysm in your brain, is size. And as a recovering reductionist, I was thinking, right, okay, well, what do we think about in terms of the biomedical markers that we might think about there? But also in terms of, okay, Do you live with people? Do you have caring responsibilities? Do you have children? Do you have parents? What's your educational background? What's your socioeconomic background? Race, culture? Do you believe in God? Do you have a dog? All of these things are the influences that we can identify. But again, we need to quantify them and understand their valence. And this is where we will build our predictive models in terms of what works for whom and why. I have spoken to neurosurgeons who have been doing very, very invasive interventions in people who have suffered from chronic pain for years upon years. And I've asked them, why have you chosen that person to put this piece of kit into? And they'll say, well, we tried everything else. As a scientist, as an academic, I'm like, where's your data? And it really is just going off these people's experiential and expertise in a way that they just think it will work because it's something ephemeral, secret sauce almost. So it is about using data in order to build those predictive models that then makes sure that you include that strata, so that if there's something that will work for one culture and won't work for another, you're not trying it in culture A as opposed to culture B, or practice A as opposed to practice B. Or are there things that you can change? Perhaps the ownership of a dog will become a prescription on the NHS. Exercise and companionship.
Similar to what Amanda said, I think it's just part and parcel, part of the conversation. You don't really even think twice about it. You're already kind of including that as part of the work that you're doing. And I think a good example is, for example, in the Northeast, ethnic minorities who are coming to get support for neurodivergence are getting less support than, for example, British-born people. And I think that has really kind of opened my eyes to say, okay, well, are we just not listening? Or what else can we do to do better? And I think part of the issue is that they've been, this group who isn't getting enough support has been labeled as hard to reach, but in fact, I don't think that's the issue. We just haven't found a way to connect to them. So I think it's reframing the ways that we think about sort of getting support, and in doing so also challenging those inequalities. Because again, knowing UK data, I'm teaching tomorrow a module on physical activity and inequalities, brand new module. So we're also teaching the next generation of students exactly what we're preaching. But just across the entire UK, if you're an ethnic minority, your chances of getting support and access just by virtue of that are lower than if you're not an ethnic minority. So absolutely just part of the conversation at this point for us.
We'll take one further question and then we are going to have a question at the back there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alan. I'm Alan, graduated in 2002. So I support adults who have a specific vulnerability towards their journey towards independent living, and that includes their physical health. And I've come across two barriers specifically, I think that's becoming more prevalent. So there are those who, because of the prevalence and growing prevalence of obesity, don't believe they fall into that category because so many people around them are all a similar weight or size or you want to term it. So they just don't believe they're in that position, or accept that they're in that position, but to broach that subject with them, which I'm kind of required to do after that journey towards independent living. They use terms like fat shame and so on. And it's very hard to engage, I think, a growing number of people in this physical health pandemic, really. So how do we cross those kind of barriers where people just, because their whole family is obese, they don't believe they are, because that's just around them, or they feel we're being so offensive, and obviously have to ask them what to do. I'm just concerned for and trying to help their physical health as part of the whole. Just any suggestions on that would be really helpful.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to kick off, I think. I think the first thing to say is that obesity in size isn't always an accurate predictor of health risk or mortality either, right? So sometimes it takes our own thinking to kind of question, sort of, is this the actual problem all the time, right? That is kind of step one. The second piece that I found really helpful, and we did this with neurodivergent young people, is we developed a toolkit. It's a conversation starter. The hardest part sometimes might be starting a conversation, right? And it's not just for family members or at work. GPs and health professionals say, if it's about weight, I don't want to talk about it. It's taboo, it's sensitive, I don't want to deal with this. And that's one of the things that we found the hardest, is actually getting people to talk about a difficult issue, right? So in our toolkit, one of the first things was kind of highlighting the importance of not judging and just understanding sort of how they feel about it. Because as soon as we kind of scare people, well, based on your weight, you're going to get X outcome, that doesn't contribute to anything. Right? But I think part two is to also kind of be along that journey. If there is any sort of change, it won't happen short term. It's going to have to be a longer term sort of commitment. And I think what I want to end with is if we see the person first before their size, I think that might contribute more so to a longer term sustainable change, if that's what they want, versus sort of just trying to pack them with an intervention, because we know the rate of adherence is less than 5%. So you've got to think about new ways in terms of starting those conversations and actually following up on them in order to actually have a change.
Maureen?
I think that complements very nicely sort of the research that I've been doing around households as well, in terms of how you initiate those kinds of conversations. And generally, in the main, sort of chronic health conditions, particularly obesity, hang around other complex intersectional health conditions as well, depression, lots of other neurodiversity for others as well. And so typically, when individuals, talk to health professionals, talk to a GP, it's about sort of eliminating that problem, if you like, rather than talking about sort of the whole subjectivity of that individual. So I've had discussions with GPs before where they're so rushed and under pressure to see patients. They don't, for example, have the time to take an entire life history or just even a 10-minute conversation about what could be the other things that are contributing to the cause of this fundamental health condition for that individual. So, I mean, Patrick's absolutely right. It's about how you sort of initiate. Fantastic, we've got a toolkit. I need to look at that. Initiate those kinds of conversations and kind of what are the sort of supportive mechanisms around that? Because it's not just a quick change. And typically, we're looking for that in society. What pill can I take? And there's a whole celebrity culture around this in terms of Instagram filters and everything else. I'm sure we can get into that as we get over wine, cheese and nibbles or whatever else is coming up. But it's always a quick fix solution rather than the lifestyle element. So actually, obesity is just one element, one endpoint of lots of other contributing health factors that intersect with that. Where you live, where you come from, whether you are employed or not, whether you have a dog to get out for, what it is, your educational background, your cultural background. Everything is all part of that, and we're trying to condition health in such a way that it's through 5-minute GP appointments. So of course they're going to try and prescribe us something because they want to see us and get to the next patient, rather than that kind of more holistic. I'll take a step back. Where are the points of intervention, and who can facilitate that and support it in the long term? We need to talk more.
Thank you. We could go on and on. Actually, this is an absolutely compelling conversation. I can tell. That the colleagues have found it really compelling, but we do need to draw to a close. I'm sure that it's a bit more than wine and cheese and nibbles. It's actually bowl food. So we're going to have a reasonably substantial meal after this. So I'm sure our panelists would be very willing to follow up on further conversations. And thank you very much for the questions, and thank you to our panel for a simply fascinating and really inspiring set of talks and responses. Thank you.
Thank you.